An above-average hurricane season is in the forecast. I'm in South Padre Island, Texas for the National Tropical Weather Conference, where the numbers from Colorado State University have been announced for the 2025 hurricane season. And I got to talk to Dr. Klotzbach, who's in charge of putting out those numbers, about why he's expecting an above-average hurricane season.
Yeah, we are forecasting an above-normal hurricane season in 2025, a total of 17 named storms, that's tropical storms and hurricanes. Of those 17, 9 becoming hurricanes. Of those 9, 4 becoming major Category 3, 4, 5 hurricanes, winds of 111 miles per hour or greater. That compares with an average season which has about 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, so a little bit above the long-term average.
And the follow-up question to that is, why are we anticipating an above-average season, and what goes into making that forecast?
Yeah, so there's 2 primary factors that go into the early April outlook. One is we don't anticipate El Nino this summer and fall. El Nino is warmer than normal water in the central and eastern tropical Pacific. When El Nino occurs, it tends to increase winds high up in the atmosphere that tear apart hurricanes in the Atlantic. Unfortunately, we don't anticipate those conditions in 2025. Also, the Atlantic, while not being nearly as warm as it was last year at this time, is still running somewhat above normal. And so when the waters in the Atlantic are warm, that provides more fuel for storms. So obviously, it's April. There's a lot that can change before the season really ramps up by about the early to middle part of August. But at least at this point, those conditions would tend to lead towards a busier season.
And I guess the other thing a lot of people say, and you hear it all the time, it's a long-range forecast. It's just a guess. Can you explain, like, it's not just a guess? Can you explain to, like, what does a long-range seasonal forecast kind of mean?
Yeah, so a seasonal forecast, this is an informational tool, not a preparedness tool. We always stress you need to be prepared the same for every hurricane season, regardless of a seasonal outlook from CSU, NOAA, or any other group is doing the seasonal forecasts. But these forecasts do show skill, and that's because basically the environment around the storms has some, basically if the overall environment near storms during the course of the hurricane season is more conducive, you're going to tend to see more of those storms form. And so there is some skill in early April. Now that will improve as we get to June. There's just less stuff that can change, so our forecast confidence typically grows from April to June, and we'll do a final update in early August. But we do have some skill at being able to do this. This is our 42nd year of doing seasonal hurricane predictions. And so obviously these forecasts aren't perfect, and we can't tell you where the storms are going to go. So it is important to realize that, this is just kind of saying overall the Atlantic as a whole looks like it's going to be conducive for an above normal season.
And I got a question just kind of on a global, because I know you look at everything around the world. Do you ever look at like typhoons in the Western Pacific or cyclones in the South Pacific and say, hey, their seasons are going off? And how it correlates to maybe what's happening in the Atlantic? Yeah,
so typically when the Atlantic is busy, the Pacific tends to be quieter, both on a seasonal timescale, because they tend to have an opposite relationship to El Nino and La Nina. So while El Nino increases your Pacific storms and decreases your Atlantic storms. And in the Southern Hemisphere, also in the South Pacific, you tend to get more storms in an El Nino relative to a La Nina. And also on a shorter term time scale, in general, when you see a lot of activity in the Pacific Ocean, that tends to be when the Atlantic is quieter on a shorter term time scale. So for example, if you see a lot of stuff in the Eastern Pacific and it's tending to move from west to east as it goes, that tends to be an indicator that the Atlantic's probably about to start picking up. So we have seasonal variability that's driven by, a lot of it's driven by El Nino and La Nina, and then you also have subseasonal variability driven by an oscillation known as the Matt and Julian oscillation that can cause significant upticks and downticks on a shorter term time scale than basically seasonal variability.
And I guess the question I want to ask you next is, the one everybody always asks, why Colorado State University? Like, what is the reason behind you kind of being the leader in the seasonal outlook?
Yeah, so my mentor, Bill Gray, would say it's because the storm surge can't get you at 5,000 feet. But no, really the reason why we have done these forecasts at CSU is because the guy who started our department, his name was Herbert Reel, was a renowned hurricane scientist in the early 1960s, came from the University of Chicago, which is still nowhere near hurricanes, started our department, and Bill Gray was finishing off his PhD at the time, so our department does a whole pile of different things, but it's always had usually 1 or 2 faculty members working on hurricane stuff. And so yeah, this is the 42nd year that our group has done seasonal hurricane forecasts at CSU. So it's a pretty cool long-term track record.
And I guess For just the final question, based on your experience, and I'm going to leave this one open to you, what is, to the general public, the number one thing that you want them to kind of take away from your seasonal outlook?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, there's a couple of things. One, obviously, this is something people are curious, they want to know, and we can provide them some information. We always stress you need to be prepared, and especially with an April outlook, now's the time to kind of make sure you have a plan in place and know what you're going to do if storms are threatening, and then if storms do threaten, to follow the advice of your local emergency managers, because they can give you the best advice whether to shelter in place or whether you would need to evacuate. And so that's really something we always want to stress with all of these outlooks.
All right. But always remember, it only takes one. In South Padre Island, Texas, I'm meteorologist Robert Spetta.